Hello and welcome to episode 32 of After the Breach podcasts. We're your hosts, Jeff and Sarah, coming to you from Friday Harbor on San Juan Island, in Washington State. And we're back in our office with Michael and Monika, who joined us for episode 30, Demystifying Killer Whales, part 1. We're here to record part 2. Hey, guys.
Ahoy.
Hi.
Hi. So this was one of the most popular episodes, and I think the one that we got the most response to. I won't say feedback, but response to. So thanks for that.
Yeah, thanks to Michael for putting my email address on air.
And this is going to betray something about me. I assumed that it would be edited, that or bleeped or something. But I guess I ended up doxing Monika a little bit.
No, I mean, I was happy to get the feedback because it's good conversation and good material for conversation.
And I'll just throw this out there. Assuming anything with my editing skills in July is not a good assumption.
Yeah, no, that it was a faulty assumption on my part for sure.
To be fair, it was June, I think.
Well, there's
like
not
July.
that much difference.
Felt like July.
True.
But you guys got a lot of feedback as well. I mean, I heard a lot of positive comments. People really enjoyed the episode.
Yeah,
we still have listeners.
I know. A lot of people started their feedback with, "I listened to the end." Like I was the one that listened to the end. We appreciate that.
Yeah. No, I was pleasantly surprised with I mostly got feedback in person from a few folks, and I was very pleasantly surprised with the overall tenor of the response. It
Yeah,
seemed
being
good.
mostly positive.
Mostly we're in the green on that one, yeah.
So we're going to continue.
And we're gonna try to get into the red tonight.
Yeah, we're gonna continue demystifying killer whales. But do we want to share some of the feedback?
I think it will just naturally come up through our conversation.
Okay.
I think.
Well,
Or do we want? There might be a couple that.
no,
A couple standouts.
I think it'll naturally come up. I think the one people were most keen for us to touch on was perhaps T109A3A, also known as Quisa Hayes or Brave Little Hunter.
Yeah, I think we briefly mentioned her in the last episode, but didn't really get into the nitty gritty of it. Do you want to kind of run us through the timeline of events, Monika?
Oh, sure.
Not to put you on the spot or anything.
Certainly not going to have dates on hand or anything like that, but T109A3 and her calf, T109A3A, ended up in an inlet on the northwest side of Vancouver Island back in March. It was March, yeah.
Yep.
Wow.
And the mother ended up live stranding on a shallow jetty, and rescue attempt was made to try and get her upright so she could be refloated at the high tide, but unfortunately she ended up drowning as the tide came in. And so this left T109A3A in the inlet on her own. And she stayed there for quite some time, and there were some failed attempts to encourage her to leave the inlet, and then a successful attempt to lure her to the mouth of the inlet, and she eventually left on her own. And so a lot of people have been, following the story very closely and very concerned about her, and wanting to know where she's been, if she's been sighted or thinking that she has been sighted, and when and where, she may reappear or reunite with her family. So there's been a lot of attention in the media to some extent, but in the whale world, the people seem to have really grabbed onto this story. And so there's been a lot of good and some maybe less accurate information out there about what's going on as this unique situation has unfolded.
Yeah, and I think what some of that information that's kind of been floating around about potential sightings or potential hearings of the whale, and it comes back to a principle we have in, I think, whale research generally, but because the main project we do is photo ID at the center, it's a really important principle for us is no photo, no proof.
Mm-hmm.
So if you see a whale that you think kind of might look like her and it's in the same area, or there's all kinds of things that might hint to someone that they might have seen this lone whale, or, hopefully not lone for too long, but, certainly
if you hear
low.
a single blow in the night.
Right, or you see a small whale, surfacing, you think, on its own far away. That's great, but no photo, no proof. If you don't have a photo, and not just a photo of the whale, but a photo that is high enough quality to do a photo
Right.
ID match for us to actually know which individual it is, that's not really a usable data point for where she is. And as of right now, we were talking before the podcast, it doesn't sound like there have been any confirmed photo matches of her anywhere on the coast.
Since early to mid-May, I think, was the
Yeah,
last
I think so.
confirmed.
I
I mean,
do think there was just confirmation of the 109. Was it the 109As
yes. So
that were in that a similar area?
they were recently seen nearby in the area where she was last seen, but the photos didn't fully capture everybody who was present. But of the whales they were able to ID, she was not there. So we don't know 100% where she is, if she's still alive 100%, or if she has met up with anybody at this point.
And, she's had some other relatives be in inland waters recently for quite a while.
Yeah, we've had the 109A2s here quite a bit
Yeah.
the last few weeks.
Yeah. So, yeah, obviously we're all really interested to hear what happens. And when a sighting does get confirmed, we hope a sighting will get confirmed at some point, but who knows? Yeah, so I think that's, less maybe demystifying, but more just like a little insight into how tracking whales gets done.
Sure.
You can't just say it was a whale in this area that roughly matches the description. You have to have a photo ID match. I think the mystical part of it might be more in, I think we talked about this a little bit, and stop me if I'm treading over.
Tread.
No,
Something
tread away.
tread,
I mean,
man,
we're going
tread.
for red here.
No, I mean stuff that we already talked about last time. I don't want to repeat ourselves too much, but yeah, I think we all had a lot of conversations while the rescue attempts were going on more broadly about what the kind of the ethics, I suppose, the morals, the reasoning behind rescue attempts of this whale. And you could really kind of expand that out to different rescue attempts of cetaceans and marine mammals generally.
Oh, yeah. That's a big can of worms.
Yeah.
And I don't think we really got into that.
No, I think we talked about sort of what's related to that in terms of the morality, and the ranking of species and that sort of thing, that we value killer whales and individual killer whales to a higher degree than some other species. And why is that? We did touch on that. And I think that plays into why so much time and money and effort goes into trying to help this one whale.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess there's a question related to that, is because we know this individual and we know her family, her mom, her extended family. If this was just some random whale, would the same resources have gone into a rescue?
Yeah, it's a good question. Like if we didn't name these animals, or if it was an animal that didn't have a number or a name yet.
Right.
And I think that comes to an interesting point about that I think about a lot, is the intersections and divergence of like animal welfare, which is very much thinking about individual animals and how to make their lives better and how to maximize their, you don't want to say happiness, but you just say welfare, and then you leave it up to whoever to decide what welfare means, versus conservation, which is really about populations and metapopulations and species. And animal welfare would tell us this is a distressed animal. We want to keep that animal. We want to put as many resources in as we can to keep that animal, to make that animal more well, to increase their welfare. And in some cases, that might align quite well with conservation. So for the southern residents, I would say, basically every individual is a important piece of keeping the population stable or potentially helping it to grow. If we lose a southern resident, that's more than 1% of the population. That's a pretty big chunk. For the bigs, it's more complicated than that because it's already a bigger population. Not a huge population as animal populations go. It's in the hundreds, not the thousands and thousands. But it's also a growing population, a really, by any ecological measure, a quite healthy population. There might be physiological measures that tell you it's not so healthy, like the amount of toxins in their blubber. But by any ecological, population, biological measurement, the big killer whale population in our area is doing really, really well.
Yeah, and I feel like, and I say this too, and it's probably going to be an unpopular opinion, and I could see getting some feedback on this one, but I'm always been of the opinion, and I still am, that it really depends on what has caused this event to happen. If it's an anthropogenic cause, if it's human cause, say the whale was entangled or that kind of thing, it's very different in my mind to something that is potentially a naturally occurring event. You know, unfortunately, in any population, be it healthy, be it endangered, what have you, animals are going to die. And that's just a part of nature. You know, we're all going to die.
Well, not me, but
not you.
Else, but,
you know, and so I'm not trying to make light of it, but if it's a naturally occurring event, if it's something that happened outside of human influence, and I guess that's where people have to decide what's that line of influence, right?
Yeah, so we have big killer whales that go missing and are presumed dead, and we never know what happens to them, but they engage in some risky hunting techniques. And sometimes I think it's reasonable to assume that some of them might live strand and not make it. But there are an awful lot of inlets and, beaches on the entire coast from Southeast Alaska to California. And something like this has probably played out before, just out of sight. This one just happened to occur in a place near where somebody saw it happen. And so got a lot more attention that way. But in this situation, in case anyone wasn't familiar, I don't think there was any human element that played a role. I think it was a miscalculation on the part of the mother that led to her being on the beach.
And I'm also not saying, like, if I was walking on a beach one day and a killer whale live stranded and there was something I could do, that I would just stand there and, wait for the tide come in and see what happened, right? There are resources that we can call. But in general, I think, like, we pour a lot of resources into altering events that happen because that's just what nature is. And I'm not saying it's bad or not, or good. I'm just saying that there's,
It's really easy for us. I think that's an important point, though. It's really easy both after the fact and also kind of slightly separated from these things. It's not like it's a whale that none of us knew, but but separated for me and all of us to kind of have the academic argument around resources and how it gets distributed. But also, we're all killer whale people, and we don't want to see killer whales in trouble.
Right.
But on the same token, we're not jumping off the boat to save the harbor seals from getting eaten by a killer whale.
They would rip my arm off, Michael.
But you know what I mean? Like,
no, I get it.
We're inherently saying that, like, this whale was essentially killed by the anti-predator tactics of the seal, right? The seal went into shallow water, the whale chased it, the whale made a miscalculation, and died. And that's horribly sad. And because it was sad, and because it died, it orphaned its calf.
Right.
Why does that have a different moral valence to us than a seal being killed and potentially orphaning a pup due to the predatory behavior of a killer whale?
And I think that goes back to what we talked about in the last one of, like, ranking, the value of a life, right? Forage fish versus seal versus orca versus...
Right, and what people we value. But right. I think the fact that there's a calf involved in this also plays a role.
Oh, sure.
I do think that the responders handled the situation very mindfully.
Yeah. Yes, I agree. They did a great job.
Absolutely.
And in a lot of ways, they really listened to what was going on with T109A3A herself. I think she made it very clear she was not ready to leave the inlet, and they respected that. So I respected them for making those decisions. I do think, we're inclined to help if we can.
Absolutely.
But there were a lot of people that were really angry at the time that more wasn't being done.
Right.
Well, and there were people that were angry for more not being done for 109A3. And it's like,
what else could
have been done?
Yeah, people were surprised that there weren't, there wasn't more equipment available or more people available. But again, it's just the reality of the situation with
And a
the size of
very
the coast.
remote.
Very remote,
place.
and it happened fast. It's not like they had days of where they could have gotten equipment out there. I mean, you're talking about a very compressed time frame. But yeah, there were people that were angry about that.
Yeah. And I mean, there is, I did see, I forgot who said it, but, there is the point that while the big's killer whale population compared to the population of seals or, most other mammals on the planet would still be considered a small, potentially vulnerable population. And maybe you do want to really invest in saving every single individual. I find it hard to kind of square that with the growth rate of the population. And yeah, I do think there's the logistics too, because they went through so many different iterations, or at least publicly, there were public ideas floating around helicopters and cranes and all this stuff. And I don't know the details, but I think ultimately what happened was they just let her out. She seemed to be ready. The tide came in, and they essentially helped guide her out on a small vessel.
Well, and when she left, and who knows what she was going through in terms of figuring out she had lost her mother and all of that. But when she did leave, she did it in the middle of the night at a high tide that I think was the
highest tide,
the deepest tide since it happened. And so she, in thwarting some of the attempts to help her, I think she demonstrated her intelligence. But the fact that she waited to leave an area where her mom had stranded in shallow water until the water was as deep as it had been, I think also points to, her intelligence and her tenacity in handling the whole situation. And so all of those things really changed my personal perception of what her odds were.
Yeah.
Because a killer whale under the age of 3 losing its mother doesn't have a really very good track record, even if it happens in the company of its immediate family.
Yeah, I mean, like stable isotope data is telling us they're still partially reliant on nursing at that age. They don't fully stop nursing until their 4th year. And they're definitely not, going out and hunting a porpoise on their own or anything like that. So yeah, she still very much is in that position where she needs some support. It doesn't necessarily need to be kin, but it needs to be that she needs adults around for sure.
And just as an aside, I want to be clear that I'm not reflecting on the efforts that were made. Like, I think what was done for T109A3A, the parties involved did a great job in communicating with the public and respecting T109A3A and what she was going through and what she wanted to do and I really do feel like my comments were not like judging them or what they've done in that situation, because who knows what I would have done as a person in that situation. So this is just kind of a broader, more general, but with 109A3A kind of being an example.
Well, and I think that also something that needs to be clarified is we may not know the outcome of this for years.
Yeah, possible.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of people that were astounded that we didn't know where her family was. And just the reality of tracking several hundred killer whales over thousands of miles of coastline is that there are regularly periods of weeks or months, if not years, between sightings of certain individuals. Sure. Yeah. And it's not a matter of leading her to them or leading them to her, which a lot of people thought should have been possible.
Right. There are a lot of dark areas out there. I mean, we're very fortunate in the inland waters where tracking is, we can track groups almost daily going through here and hanging out in here. Once they're out of like the Salish Sea, it's pretty remote. It's pretty dark. There's not a lot of data that comes in.
And I think people who are familiar with the whales in this region are really, really surprised by that, they're not tracked to this level everywhere.
Right.
But what we have going on here in terms of our ability to track and ID the whales is quite unique.
Yeah, and these are whales that come in and out of here. Like they're not staying in here.
Yeah, this is just a small portion of their greater range.
But one of the more maybe mystical reactions that I saw to this whole situation was people really thought that the whales would somehow know this was happening and respond to come and help her. And not just her family, but I had multiple people ask me if the southern residents were here more this spring because they were looking for her and trying to help her.
Yeah, I have heard that a few times.
And I think that's like a symptom of this general kind of public amalgamation of killer whales around the world into basically the southern residents. I think a lot of people, even if they know that there are the residents and the bigs and all these things, they see a news story about a killer whale in trouble, and it just all gets smushed together into this media mush of every killer whale story they've ever read. And I think it's, if we're talking about demystifying killer whales, here's a good one. Killer whales are xenophobic. They are xenophobic animals. They don't like hanging out with animals from other populations.
Yeah.
It's a little more fluid up in the North Atlantic. They're still trying to figure out exactly what's going on up there. But out here in the Pacific Northwest, bigs do not come to the aid of residents, and residents do not come to the aid of bigs. If residents know bigs are around, I've seen them, it's more or less on site. It's like, It's more or less dropping the gloves. Let's go right now.
Well, to be clear, before we start some other theories out there, we don't actually see regular physical altercations between them.
Oh, but they want it so bad. You can see it in their eyes, Monica. They want it so bad.
And you're saying the bigs run from that?
The bigs are terrified of a bunch of it's like,
I think we just gained some listeners now.
it's like all of the nerds at the high school you went to are coming across all the jocks, but there's 4 times as many nerds.
Wait, okay.
The southern residents are the nerds.
Okay, I was trying to figure out who the nerds were.
And the nerds are armed with a bloodlust. I can't explain it.
I think you just did.
I can definitely tell you this officially. This is the first time on After the Breach that bloodlust was mentioned.
That's kind of shocking, actually.
Well, and I don't know. It's a wild thing to see an animal that I think of as, like, I've said this before, nature's perfect killing machine running for the hills from a group of animals that I think of a bunch of kind of doofuses most of the time.
So to be clear, it's the southern residents you think are doofuses.
The southern residents are doofuses. I think of bigs as nature's perfect killing machine, and I have on a few different occasions watched bigs run for the hills from a group of southern residents from K-Pod.
So, all right. So now that we've demystified, are we now mystifying? Like, we're going backwards here.
No, we still need to understand the reason behind this. As Monika said, like, there's not a lot of observations of direct physical fighting. I think there's a couple, maybe just one good one. And
I think just the one in 93.
Yeah. But the way the bigs respond to the residents, I mean, what it's most similar to is the way killer whales in the Atlantic will respond to pilot whales.
Mm-hmm. Or in Bremer.
In Bremer, it was long-fin pilot whales, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Pilot whales will mob killer whales if given the chance because they are potential predators. We don't know what the situation is with bigs and residents. Obviously, we don't see bigs attempting to prey on residents. We have no evidence that has ever happened. But the dynamic seems very similar, where you have this larger group of slightly smaller bodied animals that when they're in the area, you will very often see the smaller group of bigger animals avoid them like the absolute plague. Yeah, as folks are kind of implying, there's a lot we still don't know about that interaction. But we
have very little reason to believe that if J-Pod, encountered T109A3A, that they would do anything, really. They would probably just not, just go right on by. It's not like they would come to her aid or
that she would accept their aid,
She'd probably run away.
Yeah.
If I had to guess what she would do if she heard J-Pod calls, my guess would be she would avoid it. Yeah.
I'd like to know your scientific justification for the southern residents being doofuses.
They just act like doofuses all the time.
Can you give one example?
I once was on a photo ID survey and I was with the J19s and the J22s.
Ooh, careful.
And we had the J19s, and they were being great. They were arching, and we had J22 kind of come up on our 1 o'clock, and J19s were over at our 9 o'clock. And I just turned to Dave and I say, "Where'd J38 go?" And we hear, and he had surfaced and was just doing this biggest like raspberry snort as he spy hopped up and then went back down, all on his own. No one was goosing him. He wasn't socializing with anyone. He was just bobbing up and down in the water, blowing raspberries. So they're doofuses. I love them, but they're doofuses.
Cindy's coming for you right now.
A perfect doofus is J38.
J38 is a perfect doofus for sure. His back doesn't meet up properly on either side of his dorsal fin.
He's perfect.
He's perfectly strange.
I have so many questions.
That's why scientific justification for the designation of southern residents as a biologically distinct species of doofus.
J38, doomed them all.
Okay,
Doofusness.
I've got to throw a couple things out here. First of all, I think the idea that the southern residents would have any awareness whatsoever of what is going on with 109A3A is like, why would they even know? And if they were passing by, what would stop them from just continuing on and with their doofus lives? I mean, there's just no reason for them to do anything or be aware of anything. And then now I'm starting to really wonder the limited info we have about the interactions between the residents and the bigs. And we've seen stuff on the water when we've been out there where the bigs hightail it out when they get into really close proximity. And now I'm starting to wonder, like, are things going to change now that we see southern residents in smaller groups and we're seeing bigs in bigger groups? I mean, the last couple of weeks, we've had groups of bigs in the inland waters for like a week. There were consistent groups of 30 to 40 bigs. Mm. And if they came across the J16s, like that, the balance is totally different.
Believe me, they would not touch that group with a
I was gonna say they don't want to get
10-foot pole.
Oh my
Just
God.
kidding.
There's
I mean, I'm not, but
I think we're gaining listeners by the minute.
Yeah. Well, there's I think there's two reasons. There's the obvious reason they don't want to get close to them, and there's also, I think, despite everything, I do think J16, I think of her as tough. I don't know why. Yeah. I just do. It's not scientific. I just think of her as tough.
I feel like she's kind of like the T123 of the southern
I
residents.
was just thinking like of a matchup, like a boxing match with.
Oh, we're not doing
look on Monica's
Killer Whale
face right now.
Death Match. We're not doing Killer Whale Death Match.
Monica sees T-shirts in this, I think.
No, but it's an interesting point, because I do think so much of it probably comes down to the group size, like with the pilot whales. Like pilot whales are much smaller than killer whales, but there's enough of them.
Right.
Similarly,
all right,
we
it's
see
4-on-4 J16s and T123s.
123s. Sorry.
123s. Yeah. The 123s.
But we see sea lions mob big killer whales as well.
Sure,
similarly.
we've seen that quite a lot.
Yeah.
But the notion that J-Pod would somehow know this was going on or want to respond, or even other big killer whales would know that this has happened, I think it's people filling in the blanks of the things that we don't know about killer whale communication and their ability to tell time and seasonality and plan things and meet up, split up and meet up with each other. There's all these things about the way that they know where other whales are that we can't explain at this point in time. And so I think people fill that in with, well, they must be psychic. And they can hear her calling for them, even though there's physical barriers in the way, to acoustic communication and things like that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've heard people talking about things happening in the Atlantic, like they're communicating with whales over here. Like there's just no physical way.
No freaking way. I think there's two things that people might get confused with there. Is that there are species of whales that communicate at depths and at frequencies and loudness where they can communicate over vast distances. Right. And if you have kind of cultural transmission of song types, like with humpbacks, you can get songs, being innovated in one side of the Pacific Ocean and slowly traveling their way over to the other side. Like, that's been demonstrated. That's a very different thing from killer whales. Killer whales mostly communicate within the frequency range that we can hear. So it's not like they're at these super low, low frequencies that travel very far. They're not that loud on the scale of whales. They're not sperm whales or blue whales. And because they are so xenophobic, you don't get this transmission of, as far as we know, you don't get this transmission of calling behavior between different ecotypes and between different populations. The populations, there's probably a lot of horizontal transmission of calling and communication within populations, but between populations, there's no great evidence that there's any transmission of call types. So I think it's people taking things they've heard about whales that are scientific about call types, not necessarily information, but call types or songs spreading across oceans in other species, and the distances other species can communicate across, and kind of just transposing that onto killer whales, which doesn't quite work.
Mm-hmm. And this is something we maybe touched on last time, that when people are kind of filling in the blank for some reason with killer whales, they default to maybe, what would I be doing in that situation? And we have this innate, desire to help this calf. And so the thought is, well, J-Pod, if they came across this orphaned calf, surely they would want to help her just like we would. And I think we make the mistake of filling in those blanks quite often with, how would I react to this situation? And that they would do the same thing.
And I think people, again, will take things they've heard or seen in other species and, first of all, interpret it in a particular way and then try to apply it. So, there's that story of a sperm whale unit potentially adopting a deformed bottlenose dolphin and stuff like that. And there's stories of, killer whales swimming around with a porpoise and playing with it. And I think people, first of all, in many cases, those are different populations or different species of whales, but also, just because we see sperm whales swimming around with an injured dolphin for a really long time doesn't mean those sperm whales are demonstrating some kind of generalized species blind altruism. And I think when you're talking, we can obviously debate about the species concept as it relates to killer whales, but when you're talking about bigs and resident killer whales, you really do have to think of it as kind of almost an interspecies kind of relationship in terms of how the whales are perceiving each other. And yeah, there's just, we want them to be people. We want them to be people, and we want them to be good people. People who would go out and help
the best of people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They're the best of people.
Mm-hmm.
And I just don't think, it just doesn't work with what we know about how they behave. Yeah, do we have anything else in the mailbag that we should hit?
And we should address at some point, the lone males. But I don't know how to segue to that from
You just did.
Yeah, we're there.
What have you heard about lone males?
Oh, they're ostracized from their family. There's something different about them that's negative, right? It's like, we always talk about how family-centric and mom-centric killer whales are, but now we have these males that they're on their own, they're orphaned, they're lonely, there's
always kind of like a negative,
right? There's something wrong that we have these independent males that will spend time on their own. Sometimes they spend time with other groups. Sometimes some of them, 65A5, are like total social butterflies. Mm-hmm. But there's something wrong because they break the mold. They're not, and my first reaction to that is like, why is something that breaks the mold bad? Like, aren't these individuals that have the level of understanding of their role in their world and the mental capability? Why wouldn't they have the ability to have, some of them are more independent than others? I remember Ken talking about Luna as being the most independent whale he saw as a calf. And like, why would different individuals not have different levels of independence? And we talked about this before. It's not just males. There are some females in the population that are also independent, and they don't have calves, and obviously, I mean, why, what's the negative of having some variable personalities?
Just to clarify for anyone who isn't familiar, this is something that's seen in Biggs killer whales, where males and females will sometimes disperse from their natal family unit. Not really something we see in resident killer whales, but we get some of these, we used to say adult males, but now we're seeing more juvenile whales do this as well, split out and go on their own for periods of time or for permanent periods of time, permanently disperse.
Yeah. And I think what's tough about it is most of what we know in the scientific literature about the consequences of social isolation in killer whales and the mother-offspring bond in killer whales and its consequences, almost everything that's been published on that has been in residence.
Right.
Soon, hopefully, we're going to start getting more of that information in Biggs. What we do know in Biggs killer whales is, in general, the mother-son bond is the strongest kind of relationship. Females will often disperse, but kind of the budding dispersal thing where they wait until they have their own kind of matriline and then they'll go off. But we don't know like what the consequence of a male dispersing is because we haven't analyzed it and we're still looking at that data. But yeah, there's no reason to assume that it is a bad thing, Right. We know that male residents are really dependent on their mom, but the bad effects we see are usually once their mom dies, right? So they had a relationship with their mom. They didn't, for consciously, quote unquote, or whatever, break that relationship. Then they lost her. Then they see bad effects. Whereas, because we don't see this phenomenon in residents, there's no way to kind of transpose what we know about residents onto this situation in Biggs.
I think one of the issues is the fact that we've taken to calling them lone males, and people recognize that killer whales are highly social. And so the perception that one of these highly social mammals would go off on their own, there seems like there's something wrong with that. But it really, I've been trying to call them roving males rather than lone males because some of them spend most of their time in the company of others and really only rarely are seen completely by themselves.
Yeah, I've for a long time I've been calling them independent males, and and some of them, even when they're in groups, a lot of the time they're kind of on the edge of the group, but they do hang out with other whales and they hang out with each other.
Well, and that's based on what we know in other species of whale where males do disperse. Really good hypothesis for why they're dispersing is because it increases the rate at which they encounter other groups and therefore potential mates, right? You might see, maybe you don't get the safety net of having your mom around, but you do get to meet up with every reproductive age female in the population over the course of the year and potentially spread your genes.
So we should be calling them like studly males.
Well, we have to get the DNA evidence in first to say that they're actually successful
that it works
at doing that, and that's right now, like I said, that's a hypothesis based on sperm whales are kind of the big one where that happens, right? Males always disperse in sperm whales and they become lone males, and then they spend the whole breeding season bouncing between groups of females.
But I do think there's something to that in that the groups with multiple adult males, we often see one of those disperse, and that makes sense from a breeding opportunity perspective, that if you are, with your adult brothers, you're going to have less opportunity to breed with the groups you do encounter than if you split out on your own.
Mm-hmm.
This is definitely making me not change my opinion, but get a whole different understanding of 65A5.
Or 77A.
Not as much, but 65A5 dispersing at 4. Right?
Okay, Jeff.
Well,
we've gone down a dark path here.
But
Hello,
have
you met me?
He has two. He has older brothers. It's like it does kind. It's early, but it would make sense to kind of learn how to be independent potentially if you kind of see the writing on the wall.
That's what I'm saying. He's like a sexual genius.
No.
All right, I've got to go.
Oh,
Do I need to edit that out?
No.
no, I think we all just need to voice our displeasure with it and then move on. But yeah, no, I do know what you mean though. There's this instinct because people mostly know about the residents and because they think of killer whales as so social and the bond between moms and their kids being so strong that they see a male not with their mom and they're like, what's wrong? Something's wrong. And it's like, probably nothing. It's probably a reasonable choice for that animal.
Yeah, I mean, they seem to be living full lives. I mean, they're playing with crab pots. They're meeting up with other whales, other independent males, other families.
I wish they would
look at
play with crab
T87.
pots less.
And a lot of them do go back to their mom and siblings.
Yeah.
I mean, 65A5 goes back and hangs out with them for periods of time, and then he leaves again.
Yeah, same with T49A1 and A2. You know,
Right.
they spend differing amounts of time, but they visit with mom pretty regularly.
Right. So I think there is this negative connotation to it, and that's one that bothers me. Like I don't know why we were assigning something negative to it when these seem like they're thriving, successful animals. That there's no problem here.
Well, I think it's reasonable too to think that they all have different social preferences too, just like humans. There are the introverts and the extroverts, and the ones that prefer, thrive on being in large groups or need their alone time. And personally, I think it's reasonable to think that might be true for killer whales.
Sure.
Yeah. 65 Bs come to mind.
As which of those?
As the introverts.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't see them a lot with other.
I mean,
You do, but not a lot.
as. A lot of times they're kind of like moving away from the big groups that are in the area. I feel like, but I don't know.
Well, that's also the 123s. Let's move on.
Tired.
Yeah, we're all fading here. It's so funny. It's 9:30.
That's a San Juan Island midnight. Is what I call that.
It is. That's a great way of putting it because, like in my former life, 9:30 would be like I'd just be rolling in from work.
Ready to hit the town.
And yeah, and it's like 9:30.
Paint Cleveland red.
Paint Cleveland orange and brown.
Oh God.
So yeah, 9:30 is like it's like 1 a.m.
It's late.
Yeah,
Everything's closed, other than Cease.
But here we are.
but here we
Talking
are.
about killer whales.
So let's
Indy is a
demystify one more, and then we'll save the rest for part 3.
Well, because Michael so generously put my email on the air, I got some direct comments. But I think I made a comment in passing last time about the Iberian killer whales over in the Strait of Gibraltar that have been interacting with vessels. And somebody said that wrote to me and said they're very clearly calling for help because of all the things that are going on in the ocean. And so I wanted to bring that one up for discussion. So that's my volley to all of you.
It's a heavy one.
It is, but it makes me.
But it's a good one to talk about.
It is a good one to talk about. It's something we get asked about quite often on our trips.
Or before our trips even.
Yeah. Well, yeah, there are people that call to book tours that are worried that we're going to get attacked by killer whales.
So number one to that is, again, to all these xenophobic populations of killer whales around the world. They're not all scheming together and collaborating in an uprising against humanity, or really communicating at all, or sharing behaviors with one another. So while this is a behavior that has spread through that one local population, there's no reason to believe that it will start being shared around the world.
Right. Killer whales aren't reaching across to other communities to organize an uprising to get rid of the capitalist system, but you can.
They're also not, I as far as I'm aware, they've not been elected by all the creatures of the ocean to represent and voice the ocean life.
Great white sharks
issues.
would never vote Orca.
No,
Right.
they're dictators. This is not a democracy.
I thought for some
Democracy.
reason, I am very naive that I thought the ocean was a democracy.
Yeah. Well,
Have you met killer whales?
I didn't think the killer whales would eat my face. Oh, what were we talking
This is
about?
Iberian orcas.
This is one of those that we think that everything must have something to do with us. It's always got to be about us.
Well,
Yeah.
and I think it starts because to be on one of these vessels, this would be a very scary thing to have happen.
For sure.
Especially if you're not familiar with orcas.
Right. For me, I'm into it, man.
Yes.
Well, Sarah said yesterday that if this was happening here, she would cover a boat in rudders and go out there.
I'm
See
in.
what happens.
Right? Totally.
But it feels like an attack. But seeing videos of this behavior, it very much looks like play on behalf of the whales, where they found something that they can interact with. It moves. It might show resistance as people try to maintain steering control. So this is, something that they've found that is interesting and, elicits reactions from the people on board and that sort of thing. It doesn't, knowing what killer whales are capable of, it doesn't look like an attack. If they wanted to be truly ramming these vessels and damaging them, they would be sinking a lot more than they have.
That I think that's the most, like, the biggest argument against this is, like, we've seen when killer whales go after prey and like harbor seals, right? They don't miss. Like, their success rate is incredible when they're hunting a harbor seal. And if this was them sending a message or causing an uprising, and this is how they chose to do it, then
And where they chose to do it.
right, then they're not the smart, skilled, impressive, powerful animals we think that they are, because if this is what their strategy is, they suck at it.
I mean, not to be crass, somebody would be dead at this point.
A lot
right?
of people, like, why aren't they sinking every single boat that they're going after?
Yeah, so the boats that have sunk are sinking after the fact because of the damage caused to the rudder that creates a hole in the hull.
And
sinks
usually,
the vessel.
And the whales are
usually-
long gone.
Like, usually when either it's back at the marina after being towed in or on the tow in.
Yeah. I think there's just nothing about the behavior and the outcomes that indicates this is like anything like a predator-prey interaction or anything like a serious aggressive interaction.
And
so their motivation isn't to get people in the water, because if it was, we would be seeing more of that. But it still could be, the devil's advocates will say there still could be sending a message through these interactions.
What's the message?
Yeah, I guess I just feel like, and I've said this since this has become mainstream media, and it's been happening longer than it's been in the media. If killer whales were choosing to rise up against humanity, to do any of this, why now? In the 1970s here, people were shooting them, people were stealing their babies from them, and they had a lot of opportunity of seeking revenge against humans for something that was, to me, would be way more impactful and way more, devastating to them than a sailboat.
But I think it's just as plausible that they are sending a message, and the message is, dude, invest in a better rudder. This thing sucks. This thing's a piece of junk.
I really thought, and I don't know why, maybe it's just because it's late, I thought you were going to say invest in Bitcoin, and I'm like, why would that be?
Dogecoin.
But no, I think that's a great point. And those other periods where it was more direct, not just from like an effect on the whales, but cognitively, it would be way easier for the whales at those times and places where they were being captured or shot at to directly connect this boat to the bad thing happening to them. Whereas,
there were divers in the water during some of these captures, and we still didn't see that type of response.
Whereas now they have to say, in theory, like, the ocean has fewer fish in it. That is hurting us. We think that these boats carry people who are causing the things that is hurting the ocean. Therefore, we are going to attack this other boat.
Right.
And it's just like, it's way too many steps compared to this boat stole my baby 2 weeks ago, and now I'm going to ram ram it, and that didn't happen.
Right.
So yeah, I totally agree, not just in terms of the whale's motivation, but in terms of the actual ability to connect cause and effect. There are so many times in history where it would have been easier for the whales to do so. It just, it just doesn't make sense to me as a thing to happen right now in that time, this time, that place, in those circumstances.
I think the most fascinating thing about this, and Monika, you got really into this, is the reaction of the people when you say this isn't the whales sending a message, or the people that really want this to be an uprising against humanity, and that they're all about the whales. They want the killer whales to win. Like
Team Orca. Yeah.
Team Orca.
What does that say about us, right?
Yeah.
That we want this to be happening. We want nature to fight back against the things that we've seen. And I think the timing of it is, again, motivated by our general sentiment of being, these are tumultuous times in a lot of ways. And I think there's sort of a Robin Hood-esque aspect to, oh yeah, if someone's going to lead an uprising against all the craziness that humanity's doing, it's going to be the killer whale, right? They're the best of people.
And again,
The best of us.
the killer whales are not going to and can't lead an uprising against the human order. But you can. And I only say that half jokingly because I do think you're onto something.
Oh, I didn't
there.
think you were joking at all.
But I do think you're onto something there, Monika, where it's like we so badly want something to change. We so badly want to find the hero who's going to do it. And we don't want that to be us. We want it to be. We don't want to have to do anything.
We don't want to have to do it ourselves.
Right. I don't want
Right.
to have to put in the work.
Yeah.
We don't want to have to organize. We don't want to have to, change anything about our lives. We want the killer whales to sink all the yachts, and that'll make it better.
Blow up the submarines.
And
Maybe.
Oh,
No, I
gosh, I
legitimately got
remember that.
someone that asked me, actually more than one person that asked me if they were responsible for the submarine imploding.
I remembered this. Man, it would have. It wasn't, but it's
Aside from the fact that
Interesting
killer
idea.
whales cannot dive that deep.
it's true. Sperm whales. It was
It was
Ziphius.
sperm whales. It was that was their mission to start the uprising.
Join Team Sperm with Indy.
Teams. Oh,
Instead, Team Orca.
team sperm.
Just connecting the dots.
I wish you didn't
Maybe they'll continue.
Unconnect them, Monika.
disconnect the dots.
Maybe they'll
Just
continue the uprising, and J38 will run for president.
I'd vote for him.
You would get a lot of votes. I mean, he's perfect.
He's perfect in every way. I'm trying to think if there's anything we need to say last about this, because I do feel like in a little bit of a way, like the moment of the Iberian whales has passed a little bit. It's not as, let me put it this way, I'm not getting 2 emails a day about it anymore.
It is still in the
But-
news, though. I mean, it's still ongoing.
But I do worry that, and I think we've talked about this before, I worry, it's all fun to talk about the whale uprising stuff.
Mhm.
I think it's funny. I've been tempted to buy the bumper stickers, even though I think it's, not at all what's happening, because it's fun and it's funny. But I do think there's a danger inherent in giving the whales that kind of agency in it, which is if it continues and it escalates and someone does eventually die, the temperature around the whales is going to be high.
Well, it already
is.
over
Yeah.
there. I
Um,
mean, it's remarkable that neither a human nor a whale has been killed yet,
Yeah.
really. But again, it's not just going to affect the opinion of whales there. It's going to affect the opinion of killer whales everywhere. And that's my biggest fear, is that we start getting people here who, we have whales that are occasionally curious about vessels. And I'm afraid that a whale's going to approach a boat here and get shot at or something like
Right.
that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's,
Well, it wasn't that long ago that did happen
That
here.
did happen, yeah.
Yeah.
Often.
yeah. So I don't know. I do think, I don't know what can be done at this point because it's so much its own phenomenon now and it's gone so far. And it is a genuine case of human wildlife conflict that does need some kind of management, probably. not shooting at whales, obviously, but like you can't just ignore it. People are being put in danger, but I think we could all do a better job of being really clear when we talk about it. I think we've all been pretty clear in this room, but I think as a community, like just being clear, these are whales playing. They probably barely realize that there are animals on that boat. That is just an object in their environment that occasionally makes fun noises and resists when they're messing with it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I don't know. I don't know how much good it can do at this point. I think it's so much its own beast.
Unless we send decoy boats for them to play with, and I will volunteer to be on full patrol there.
See, I thought you were suggesting experiment, but you're suggesting distract them from other boats by sending a decoy boat out.
Yes, and I'll be on the decoy boat 24/7, and they can come play with the rudder.
So you need like a really strong rudder, or like replacement rudders.
Replacement
boat
rudders.
just covered in rudders, like Sarah proposed.
Exactly.
1,000 rudders.
Exactly.
Which one's the real rudder?
A biblically accurate boat.
But I mean, if they're going after the rudder and that's the toy, wouldn't they rather go after a boat with 1,000 of them? I mean, if you're going to the arcade, right? Do you want the big arcade with all the games, or do you want to go just?
No, that's the arcade with like
with the
1,000
Pac-Man.
copies of the same game.
Do you want to play Street Fighter,
But
or do
it's
you want
like-
to play Street Fighter with 1,000 joysticks? I think if anything, you could just spread them out, just so you kind of need like decoy backs you have a barge, and you just have the backs of sailboats lined up along the barge.
I like that.
Well, and sorry, not to like return to
No.
the
like
Please
derail our
do.
really good ideas.
Please
Yeah.
But
You're returning to 65A5.
no. We see killer whales interact with man-made objects
Mm-hmm.
in their environment all
All the time.
and everywhere. And yes, it's not rudders here on sailboats in an open ocean environment, but we see them playing with crab traps. We see them playing with sailboats that are moored and pulling them around. You can see the video on YouTube. So they're just curious animals, and they interact with things that are new and novel in their environment, and that's why we had these fad behaviors with the southern residents back in the 90s, and why we still see them playing with human-made objects now.
Right.
And
There's no reason.
And
Right.
it's not about us.
Right.
Even
It's-
if we put that object there.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not like there isn't this uprising in the Salish Sea from the big killer whales here to free the crabs.
Advocating for the crab.
Yeah.
Oh, but that would be such
That
an
would be
easy story to
that'd
spin.
Be a great T-shirt.
Free the crabs.
I told you were thinking of T-shirts.
Don't
Only 'cause
don't
you put it
get
in my
crabs.
Michael wants you to unsay that.
Yeah.
So I think this episode was incredible. And I think we can get 2,000 listens to this personally.
2,000?
That's my
That's what we're-
challenge
That's
to
our
you.
goal. So please.
That would be the best. That would be the highest ever, yeah?
Yeah, it would be.
Yeah.
So please, or is it 2,000 or 4,000? It might be 4,000.
2,000.
No, but I think the Icelandic one was actually 3.5K. But Sarah's going to look that up now. So we have a goal of getting the most listens of this episode. So please share this with
And
your friends.
Smash that subscribe button.
Yeah. And share it on social media, Facebook, Instagram.
Oh yeah, it would be 4,000.
All right, we want
3.4K on
Okay, we want
That's the current record?
that's the current record.
Okay.
So we're going for 4,000 listens on this episode. So
I mean, we've got it all.
we have everything in this episode that you could ever want.
So,
and probably some things you don't want.
but if you want to introduce all your friends to this podcast, this is the gateway
this
episode.
is the gateway episode.
Yeah.
So share it on social media. Send
This would be a terrible episode to like get
I
introduced to.
beg your pardon.
Like, introduce your friend who doesn't really know much about killer whales yet and have this be the first thing they listen to. Like, just such inside baseball stuff. I think it's great.
And then they find out who all of you. Well, I was going to say us, but you two are, and
Michael at whaleresearch.com.
Yeah, that's Monika's email address.
They're like, these are the people leading scientific inquiry into killer whales.
I think we should pull an all-nighter.
Please, God, no.
I can't do it anymore.
Please, God, no.
All right, so yeah, share this on social media, share it with your friends, help us get 4,000 listens on this episode.
If we do,
we'll do a part 3.
Ooh, I like that. We're making that's the incentive. If you like this and you're still actually listening and you want part 3.
If we get to 399 and that's it, then we're not doing part 3.
Right.
It has to be
It has to be 4,000. Yeah.
4,000.
So you got to do your part out there.
Feels like we're like every episode we're going to be getting more adversarial with the listeners.
and we'll include
we really appreciate you listening.
And
I just want to throw that out there to those of you that have stuck around through this episode, through the ups and downs.
And we'll include a Free the Crabs Killer Whale t-shirt.
That's the episode, I think. I think that's probably the end of the episode.
Thanks for joining.
Thank you guys so much for joining us. And remember, stay safe out there. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of After the Breach podcast. If you've enjoyed it and want to help us out, please share this with your friends, family, and any other whale-loving folks you can think of. We would also love to hear your feedback, so please leave us a review wherever you listen to podcasts. If you have topics you're interested in and would like to hear on the show, please send us an email. We'd love to hear your thoughts. You can find us on Instagram as @AfterTheBreach and on Facebook as After the Breach Podcast. And if you'd like to go whale watching with us, then come on up to San Juan Island, Washington State. We run tours with Maya's Legacy Whale Watching, departing just steps away from the ferry landing in beautiful downtown Friday Harbor. It's a great destination for a day trip or multiple days and offers some of the best whale and wildlife viewing in the world. We would love to take you out on the water to see the amazing whales we talk about on our podcast. You can book a tour through the company website at www.sjiwhalewatch.com and make sure to mention you're a podcast listener when you book. Thanks again for listening, and remember, stay safe out there.